Hey everyone, the work on my 356 transmission continues this week. I did get some new parts, or good used parts hopefully, so today I'm going to continue the evaluation of those used parts, make sure they're suitable for this transmission, and hopefully get some assembly done. I am running out of time.
Garage Time.
The problem I'm having is with fourth gear. This needle bearing is what I took out of the transmission and it's missing a roller. I got a roller from Tom at CarQuip and it was the wrong size, which then led me to understand that the fourth gear bearing is actually got the same length of a roller as the third gear bearing, but the cage is taller. So the cage of these two bearings are the same, but one has longer rollers and one does not. This is the genuine factory Porsche bearing, and this is something from either a different transmission or it's just a generic number. My hunch is that the reason why the rollers aren't full length is because this is the gear. It has its internal bore. That's where the rollers slide on. But this dog tooth, which is the thing that I pressed on, is a very tight press. And it was difficult to press on, I'm not gonna lie. That pressure can actually alter the diameter on one side. So the way the parts manual shows this bearing installed in fourth gear, it's such that the area underneath the dog teeth, which can, squeeze down on the gear diameter, it goes in this orientation. Just like that. And I think this is a more reliable diameter on the gear side. And that's where the forces on the gear are, directly below the actual gear. So I believe that's the rationale on why you don't want to use this bearing, even though it did run fine. So the fact that this spins freely and there's no detectable, play or it's very minimal. I'm really confident now on the pinion shaft. It's ready to go. It's ready to be pushed onto the intermediate plate. And that is where the next problem is. Last week, I changed the bearings here on the intermediate plate. And what I noticed is some evidence of a spun bearing. Pretty confident that the intermediate plate itself is not damaged to the point where this bearing is too loose. What I did find was damaged was this plate has a counterbore in it, and it looks like probably not during the last rebuild, but at some point this bearing was spinning and it was damaging or removing material from this part of the counterbore. So what happens when you go to push this back down and you bolt it and torque it, there's not enough bearing crush or bearing preload on the outer race. And the fear is that this bearing could spin again if it's not correctly clamped down. This one's been sandblasted, so I'm gonna put it in the ultrasonic cleaner and brush it really well because I don't want any sand in the new bearings. So you hear that gritty sound? You get sand in between the threads, and it's just not a good idea to sandblast engine parts or transmission parts. So I'm just gonna blow these out, run some bolts up and down, make sure I get all the sand out, and then we'll go ahead and evaluate its fit. That's kind of like the junk that came out of the threads. So now I'm comfortable now putting it near my bearings. It's clean enough. The bolt goes in really nice now. No crunchy sounds. Okay, so we'll put this on top and just kind of look at how, what's happening with this is, where is it making contact? What you want it to do is you want it to make contact to the bearings first, and then the plate second. In fact, there should be a clearance. That's what I have these feeler gauges for. The clearance should be anywhere from .002 to .005. So if I have like a 4,000ths gauge, it looks like I can't get that in either. It goes in right here, but it's bottoming out right here, which means it's not crushing the bearing at all. And then this side looks like it has some clearance. This is the side that was the problem with this plate. So this side has a 4,000ths clearance. This side is like 0, which is a little bit concerning. So I'm gonna lap this down with just some like a granite table and some sandpaper, and I'm just going to make this fit exactly how I want it, which is really 4,000ths across the board anywhere you put it. So I'm also going to measure how consistent, because this looks like it might have been machined before. I'm going to measure how consistent the counterbore depth is, just to know if this is, clamping around the entire diameter and not just one little corner. So I'm just going to put tick marks in 4 locations. So there's 2, 3, 4, and then this will be, I guess, A, B, I guess this is B right here, C, D. This is a depth micrometer, pretty accurate at doing this kind of measurement, so we'll get it set up. 3025. .1014. The numbers on the larger counterbore, which is on this side, these are all pretty consistent. This is within a few 10,000ths of an inch. Basically, it's .302. On this one, it's a little bit more varied. It's in this position 2, it's the lowest, which it seems like it must be clamping okay there. But in this position 3, that's where it's the highest. So from here to here, it's like high to low. And it's not off by much. It's off by, 1.5 thousandths of an inch. So what I can do is the surface of this one, this is the factory one, this one is a little bit smoother. This one has a little bit of surface roughness because whoever machined it probably did it with a dull cutter or something, because it just has a little bit of touch to it. You can feel it. Rather than bring my parts into the kitchen, I just bring the kitchen into the garage. This is the secret to being married for 20 years. 20 years will be our anniversary this October. I have my own bathroom in the garage too. And my wife always knows where she can find me, because I've been spending a lot of time out here on this 356. Okay, can you hear that? It's a little bit of non-flatness on that. And so this is not a perfectly good surface table, but if you keep rotating it and you still feel the wobble, then it's probably not the table. Flat right there. So they both aren't perfectly flat, but this one is flatter than this one. So it's just gonna get some like 400 and just work it. It's taking off my Sharpie marks, which is fine. And then I'm basically, controlling the pressure. I'm cheating a little bit on the pressure because this is the side that needs more clearance. And so, everything is getting surfaced, but I'm purposely putting more pressure right here. I'm probably taking this way too far of an extreme, but because this is my car and I want to give it the very best possible parts, I usually overkill things. And it's really just out of newness. I don't think an experienced builder would go through this much trouble. Both surfaces on the new plate are pristine. You can't feel a fingernail scratch or groove in it at all. That's why I'm focusing on this plate and not this one. So you're getting a lot of removal right here. That's where the feeler gauge was contacting tight. So it's removing a little bit right here next to this bolt hole, and it's removing quite a bit right here where I'm putting downward pressure. So I think we're on the right track. Let me take a close-up for you guys. Getting some rocking still, but it's not as bad. So we just need to keep going until this high spot is low enough to where it won't rock. Okay, I'm getting very close to the plate being flat, and the preload is getting very close. The thing that I'm checking now is which bearing does it contact first? And it contacts the bigger bearing first. So what I'm doing is I've done measurements with my micrometer to establish the height of this bearing. And I've written all the numbers down in multiple places, and I'm establishing the height of this bearing. And then I'm comparing that to the depth of the counterbores. And it does confirm that this bearing here, the larger one, gets more crush than this one does. And I can verify that with these feeler gauges too, because if I put pressure on this upper bearing, which it contacts first, then I can put my feeler gauge between the bearing and the plate. So that means that it's actually not pushing down on the small bearing, it's largely pushing down on the bigger one. So I'm correcting that a little bit now. It's only 0.02 of an inch difference between the disparity between the counterbores and the heights of the bearings. So it's really, at this point, kind of splitting hairs. So what will happen is this bearing is going to get clamped down. It's actually got 4 spots on it. This one here only has 1 bolt that clamps it down. So it will clamp it down on this side, but I'm going to try to increase the depth of the counterbore on the plate so it puts a little bit more pressure on the small bearing. So it turns out that this bearing race fits inside here perfectly. And so I'm able to kind of lap this with some grinding paste. This is 400 grit grinding paste. Or I can use this guy here. This is one of the mandrels I've been using. It fits in here, and I have a slightly larger one that'll fit in here too. So rather than grind on the bearing race, which is pretty hard, I am just going in here and I'm just removing, like I said, 0.02 of an inch on this counterbore, especially in the spot between the bearings, so that when you clamp it down, it has a better chance of clamping on this smaller bearing. This is what the paste looks like. It's almost like toothpaste, to be honest. So I'm just putting a little bit in here. You can hear it kind of scratching a little bit. And then I actually like this tool because it has a sharper radius on it, and that is allowing me to get right into the counterbore. So I just hold it flat, and I'm just working it back and forth. Or I can use this. It's going to take a while to get down 2 or 3 thousandths, but you know, this is the kind of the extra mile you get when you do your work yourself. You can see that kind of black stuff in there. That's basically metal removal. So we're sneaking up on it. It's nothing rapid, but by the time you set this up on a mill, it would be very difficult to do because this spot here is not flat. It's cast on that side. So you'd have to basically build a plate to attach it to this flat surface and then drill holes in the plate, and it would be a lot of work to set this up in a mill. So just gonna do it by hand. 0.01 of an inch. Okay, this is pretty slow going, but what I found works better is I'm using the bearing race, And I'm just putting some regular sandpaper on here. This is adhesive backed. So I just set that down, making these little discs. I've already gone through a few of them, but I find that this works a little faster. Plus, this is 180 grit, which is much more aggressive than the 400 in the grinding paste. And this is just a little bit less messy. So what I do here is I just come along here with these special scissors, and I can cut a perfect circle. So this doesn't affect the diameter, it only affects the depth. So it's a little bit better control, a little bit less mess. And this is a perfect fit. So it's a really nice square way to keep the sandpaper in control of the depth on that. So I just work it around a few times, and then I'm constantly checking with the micrometer to see how much material is being removed. And I'm already at about 2.5 thousandths, and it's getting really close. I guess you can call it blueprinting or whatever you want to call it. I just want to make sure that I'm getting even pressure on the bearings, and probably about an hour into it by now. Inside there, it's nice and shiny. If you push down, it's contacting the tops of each bearing at the same amount. So this is the thinnest feeler gauge, it's 1.5 thousandths. That's half a sheet of paper. And so when I push this around, it won't go in on this upper bearing no matter where I push. So it's contacting the upper bearing, a little bit loose right there, but it just depends on where you put your finger pressure. I got this tilted up so you can see on the camera. And then right here, it's the same. So if I tuck this in on the side, it will not go in. Barely goes in right there. It won't go in right there. And it barely goes in right there. Won't go in right there. And then I'm looking at the clearance between the intermediate plate, and I'm using a 5 thousandths gauge on that one. Where did that go? That's this one. And I'm getting about 5 thousandths all the way around the plate. And that's the max crush. And it's really even 5 thousandths everywhere you go. This is the Porsche factory gasket. This came from Brendan. And this is 2.5 thousandths. And by the time it crushes, it's probably going to be 2 thousandths. So that gives me a bearing crush or bearing preload of 3 thousandths. The range is between, in thousandths of an inch, 0.0012 to 0.0051. So getting 3 would be right in the middle of the range, and I'm very confident it's consistent, and I'm getting bearing pressure everywhere you go. These surfaces are very clean. I'm not getting anything off on the towel. Even though I've been using the paper on this, I've put it to the ultrasonic cleaner, and all this is very, very clean. So let's get the gasket on here. Fits well. Probably should put it on here first. Go ahead and put it down. And then I'm using the old retainers for now, but I have new ones. Basically just snugged it up, and I suspect that all those gaps just went away. Let's check. Yeah. Okay, the wrench is set to 14. That's the full torque. So we'll start here in the middle. The heights are perfect. So everything's being clamped down in the middle. And of course the bearings still spin. So great news. I will take this apart one more time, put the new retainers in, and just double check that the bearings didn't get seated anymore. Make sure that we still have the same crush. And like I said, final time, put the retainers on and fold them up. I'll never need this many gaskets, so if anyone would like one, I'm happy to pass on the favor that Brendan gave to me. There's a lot here. Porsche part number. I just need to work on the input shaft. This guy has a bearing race here that I need to pull this off. It's got one little clip on there. So let's pull that clip off, see if we can get this bearing off. We might have to take it to the press. And once that's done, we are ready to install both the pinion shaft and the main shaft into the intermediate plate, and that'll be it for the gear cluster. Doesn't look like it's bent or distorted beyond its normal elastic range. That's good. Put my bearing puller on here. This bearing has a taper to it, and I'm not sure this is going to work. I'm just being extra careful that I don't make any indents on that gear. Those gear teeth are very important. So I am going to go ahead and put this on my bench and just give it a little tap and see if it'll come off. All right, I don't want to risk bending the shaft, so I'm going to take it to the press. But before I go, I think I am going to put some little indents in this bearing so it really has a good grip on it. What I don't want to do is, as I'm pushing it, I don't want it to squeeze tighter onto the shaft. All the gears and stuff are put away in another box so we don't get any grinding dust or anything on it. There you can see how the little teeth there on the puller, those will make a contact with that step and it should pull it right off. I'm hopeful that's going to work. Things were going pretty well at the workshop. I got this bearing race pushed off and pushed back on again, the new one at least. And I was ready. Actually, I brought the tooling to push the pinion shaft and the main shaft back in the intermediate plate. But what I forgot to do is replace these lock tabs. And my thought was when this gets pushed in there, you may not have access to remove these bolts and get the lock tabs on. Plus, I wanted to verify the spacers because there's these two spacers here and I want to make sure I understand exactly where they go, like which side of the intermediate plate it goes on. So I didn't have my manual there at the workshop. Should be much easier to put this on. Should slip right in. Ah, pretty simple. So this is coming along great. These are the brand new lock plates. They just came right out of the Stoddard bag. One of them already has a little bit of rust on it, so I'm just going to wipe that off with my Ospo. It comes right off. And then what I thought I would do is just go ahead and put this back. Now that it's been torqued and untorqued, I'm going to use my feeler gauge and make sure none of the clearances have changed. That would mean either the bearings took a set or the plate was deformed when it was torqued down. I'm pretty confident everything was within the right range, so nothing should have gotten pushed or bent or anything. Pretty much have the same contact all around. This side was always a little bit tighter, but it's still the same as it was before. So this goes in pretty much everywhere, just a little tighter right here on this edge, but everything is 5/1000ths. And then I'm going to measure this one more time because it probably took a little bit of a compress. Yeah, pretty much the same, 2.5, or almost. It didn't really compress, to be honest. And that's all the same. So very confident now with the intermediate plate. Work up on this, even though it required over an hour worth of work to get this dimensionally correct. I'm happy with it. Just want to make sure there's nothing underneath here. I'm just going to put a little bit of blue Loctite on here. Probably doesn't need it. It's got the lock plates and they're torqued pretty high. I have less than 3 weeks away until I get to the West Coast holiday in this car. So that means basically working every day. I've already got the underneath of the car ready to accept the transmission. The engine is almost ready. It just needs the carburetors put back on it. And, you know, tons of little things to do. I'm gonna push hard, you guys, to get this car done and driving by next week. Also, if you guys haven't already purchased a Garage Time shirt, the new shirt from Cory at Renan, you know, please do so. I don't think many of you got it last week, so please consider supporting Cory and myself. Just keep this content coming, you guys. Unfortunately, I'm not able to show you guys everything that I'm doing to the 356. Like, you know, a lot of it's repetitive, brakes and rebuilding the master cylinder and petcock valve. And I'm just in full court press mode, so I'm not able to record every little bit. So your support helps to keep these videos coming. I appreciate it. See you next week. Cheers.